US Secretary of State Antony Blinken finally met his Chinese counterpart Quan Gang in Beijing. Blinken's trip is the highest level by a US official to China in nearly 5 years, as the two powers look to notch down the temperature in a spiraling rivalry of sorts. According to reports, both sides held discussions with hopes of improving communication and preventing conflict in the future. However, the US officials have played down expectations of a significant improvement in relations between the two countries during the two-day visit. The response comes even after Blinken said he would seek to avoid miscalculations and responsibly manage relations with China. US policymakers identify China as the greatest challenge to Washington's global stature. The world's two largest economies have been battling with each other on several issues, with trade, technology and regional security concerning Taiwan at the core. Blinken also separately spoke with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts ahead of his visit to China, for which he has landed in Beijing. Now, this is according to the US State Department. The State Department also said that the talks emphasized on the importance of sustained trilateral cooperation between the three. According to South Korea's foreign ministry, Blinken said he supports South Korea's efforts to develop a healthy and mature cooperative relationship with China. The ministry added that the three nations agreed that US, South Korea and Japan should continue to urge China to play a constructive role in the UN Security Council on denuclearization. All right, for more on this, we are being joined by Greg Swenson from London. Greg is an international affairs expert. Always a pleasure to have you on the broadcast here, Greg.
Nice to be here, Shivan.
Right. Greg, US was not expecting a big breakthrough from the visit. They've been clear about it. But at this point, after such dwindling diplomatic ties between the two nations, a nearly indefinite postponement of Blinken's visit to Beijing back in February, the fact that Blinken has finally made it to China, is that itself a big enough achievement for now? What can we expect going forward?
I don't think it's a huge achievement. I guess it's a start. And as I've said, it's there's never a bad time for engagement or diplomatic conversation. But I think the problem is Blinken is coming in from a real position of weakness. You had the dressing down or the lecture that he received in Alaska at their first meeting almost 2 years ago. But you also have the fact that the U.S. has just cut defense spending. And it really flies in the face of the argument that, that weakness breeds aggression. And the best way to avoid war is to prepare for war. And so I'm afraid that Secretary of State Blinken has gone into these conversations from a position of weakness, thanks to the Biden administration, who've done very little on, against China's economic coercion. And, the couple of incidents like the spy balloon and these police stations and the movement in Cuba, buying farmland in the U.S. near military installations. And then, of course, you have the Penn Biden Center in Washington, funded by the Chinese, and at least the perception of compromise on the part of the Biden administration because of the payments that Biden's family was receiving from CEFC. So these are, it's a long list of issues that the administration really hasn't confronted. And I mentioned the defense spending, a 3% cut in defense spending at a time in the world where, there's a lot of risks. It's probably not good timing. It's the lowest defense spending as a percentage of GDP. It'll be below 3%. The first time it's gone below 3% of GDP since the 90s, when the U.S. was experiencing a really phenomenal peace dividend from the end of the Cold War. So I'm afraid that, I'm glad that Secretary of State Blinken lowered expectations. I think that was wise, because I wouldn't expect much to come out of it, given the position of weakness that the U.S. is in.
Greg, Biden had mentioned that he'll be meeting with Xi Jinping again in the coming months and talking about areas where the two nations can get along. Which are these common areas where the two nations could build ties?
Well, surely it's in terms of economic and trade discussions. Again, the U.S. is not coming from a particular position of strength, but there is some dependency on each side. The CCP really needs the U.S. as a trading partner. And unfortunately, the U.S. has become very dependent on Chinese exports and the Chinese market. So you'll see a lot of support from corporate America on, kissing and making up here and trying to get back to the trade relationship of the last 30 years. But that's what got us into this problem in the first place, that supply chain dependency. So look, there are a lot of challenges around that. I think there has to be some caps or some restrictions on U.S. investment in the Chinese tech and military complex. You've got to get back to free and fair trade. And I think there's a lot of work to do, but I think that's one area where they can actually reach some kind of agreement.
Right, and ironically, in 2022, the trade between US and China, it surged amidst all the dwindling diplomatic ties. So let's see how it builds up from now. Right. And as you said, Blinken is coming from a point of weakness, but it's never too late for engagement. Thank you so much for joining in on the broadcast, Greg. That was Greg Swenson joining us from London.